to our phones. We don't own our phones. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I have friends who rent their clothing. Send it back when they're done with it. So from your point of view, where you sit, is that really true? Are we really seeing the end of car ownership?
I think what we're seeing is changing in the models of ownership. So, for example, like we're still selling cars. We're selling the most cars we've ever sold in our history. But I think the use cases of how you use the cars will change. So, utilization will have to go up, right, to make the economics work better. The general trends we're seeing are, I think, confirm what you're saying, is that younger folks generally don't necessarily want to own cars or things in general, assets in general going forward. We're seeing the rates of people applying for driver's licenses going down in certain countries because there's just a lot more options out there these days. So we're all about giving folks sort of the freedom to choose what works for them. So, to be honest, like if I'm living in a dense urban city, car ownership could be quite complex for me, right? So we want to be able to provide a solution for that as well. So I think the car industry, car sales will continue to grow, but the way those cars are utilized or commercialized, the advent of fleets will really evolve.
Okay. So you just said you think the car industry will continue to grow. Andre, you run a company right now where relies on people owning cars in order to rent them, but at the same time I've also heard that you're enabling people not to own cars because they can rent them from Turo owners. Which side of this does your company fall on? Are you happy to have people not owning cars?
We're happy to have people continue to own cars, but also own fewer cars. That's like the best case scenario for our business model. And that's what we're seeing happening. At the macro level, the sales numbers of cars, in the US, around the world, to echo what Zaki was saying, continue to be very, very high. I think last year was a new record that was set in many markets. In the US, there are almost 300 million cars. Around the world, we've surpassed 1.2 billion cars last year. So the numbers are bigger and bigger every year. So that trend continues. But what we're finding is a lot of people are challenged with the costs of car ownership. A lot of people are realizing, that between the car payment, between the insurance payments, between parking, especially in urban areas, the car is increasingly unaffordable. In fact, there was a study that was published a few weeks ago that indicated that in the US there are 7 million households that were behind on their car payments. It's a really big deal. And so, because of the economic constraints of car ownership, many more people are realizing that, they can actually share their car when they're not using it. And with the earnings that they can make by renting out their car a few days a month, they can actually recover a big part of the cost of ownership. So that's the dynamic on the supply side that we're seeing. On the demand side of the market, is what we're seeing is a really different dynamic in the age groups. We're seeing in the demographics there are, the less than 20 than 25, definitely a decline in car ownership. We've been surveying our community for the last 6 years, once a year. Every year, at the end of the year, we ask them a few questions, and we've been tracking ownership of vehicles in our community of people who are renting cars on Turo. And while we're seeing many of the demographics stay stable, in the less than 30 demographic, car ownership has been declining by 10 points every year. So our view is that the future is one where cars continue to be a big part of what people buy, but the personal rate of vehicle ownership will likely decline from the high 90s, where it is today, to potentially somewhere in the mid-70s over the next 20 years, if you extrapolate those trends.
Okay, so still a majority.
Still a majority.
But a larger and larger minority of people are going to take other approaches to using their cars. Now, part of that, the second part of finance and insurance, of course, is the insurance part of it, which I know we all